I'm the last speaker, so then you. So I'm Liz Crossan from Los Angeles Waterkeeper. As you all know, our organizations and others have consistently pointed out the numerous deficiencies and illegalities of the 2012 permit's alternative compliance approach. And at the last hearing on your previous order, we agreed with you that the iterative process in the previous permit had failed, but we urged you to actually see the similarities between that iterative process and the process in the 2012 permit. I think that Dr. Booth's presentation of the continued deficiencies that we're seeing in the watershed management plans and the illegally extended process as the regional board has provided demonstrate that. And as Steve pointed out, this is especially true with regards to the WMPs, which by design do not have the robust requirements or multiple benefits that are required in the EWMPs. It's important to make that distinction. And the revised WMPs and their conditional approvals only demonstrate that our criticisms and fears have come to be true. In addition to this overarching issue, I'd like to address a few new problems introduced in the most recent revised order. We've discussed our concerns with the reliance on the reasonable assurance analysis and have even proposed an alternative approach to this permit that would include a more robust requirement. The revised order, however, instead of improving the RAA, it actually weakens the process by extending the deadline for permittees to update the RAA to 2021, which is 8.5 years after the permit issuance. This allows permittees to implement their WMPs already deemed deficient using reasonable assurance analyses that don't even comply with the minimal requirements of the permit, as just noted by Dr. Booth. And this is for years after the current permit cycle. So I ask you, how is that different than the failed iterative approach? In addition, on the non-stormwater, there were some recent revisions on Friday, and the original revisions, I think in the April version, made clear that although the alternative compliance mechanism can be a mechanism for complying with the non-stormwater provisions, that it doesn't constitute compliance. And we urge you to go back to that original language because we believe that the added language on Friday further complicates it and moves us away from clarity and adds this fact-specific analysis deemed to the regional board. The revised order also attempts to escape the permit's inconsistency with clean water laws and regulations through some creative yet insufficient legal gymnastics. First, the revised order improperly allows compliance with TMDL-based WQBLs and RWLs to be established through the development and implementation of an EWMP, requiring retention of runoff from the 85th percentile, 24-hour storm wherever feasible. And we do approve of this approach in concept, but there still must be a demonstration that it will actually meet water quality limits. We can't just assume that the number will get us to compliance. And EPA has agreed with that analysis and in fact recommended strengthening these provisions by adding an actual quantitative analysis to demonstrate that the actions will result in attainment and to require strict compliance if it does not. And although the revised order acknowledges that the 2012 permit stormwater retention approach does not constitute compliance with the actual limits, it did delete some additional suggestions that were based on EPA's comments and now leaves it open to regional board interpretation, and in our opinion still does not ensure that this approach will actually mean compliance. Second, the argument with regards to backsliding similarly fails, citing that this falls into the new information exemption while stating that it actually is that the regional board has a new understanding of old information is not legally defensible in any statute, regulation, or state law. Finally, as articulated in our most recent comments, the anti-deg analysis is deficient for several reasons, but importantly, it fails to follow EPA's test to determine the potential economic impact. And this lack of analysis puts our already impaired LA waterways at great risk of degrading even further. The record simply does not support the conclusions in the permit or in this revised order. I know that you've heard from us over the last several years on these legal issues with the permit and the policy failures and the severity of the potential impacts on the environment and public health. And we have demonstrated, I think, at this point that the safe harbor scheme is a failure because these watershed management plans will not demonstrate compliance. But I think what is at the front of all of our minds that work in this field right now is the drought. And we have to make the connection between this permit and the drought. There are serious consequences if we fail to integrate efforts on the drought and this permit. As one of the regions most impacted by drought and most in need of local water supplies, Los Angeles needs leadership from the State Board to maximize and integrate efforts. This permit, if it truly required compliance with water quality limits without safe harbors and mandated stormwater retention wherever feasible, it could play a critical role in reducing our reliance on imported, energy-intensive, and quickly depleting sources of water. Thank you.
All right, question. Quick one. I mean, let's go back to the middle issue, if you don't mind, and I want to move to some of the later ones. And I know we'll be talking about this throughout the day, but I don't want to wait all the way to the end. One of the things that I have always felt was important is that there be a there. Real projects, real compliance, something showing action versus just words. And I'm not sure how to deal with the fact that if so, and I know we'll come back to the regional board about this, if we took this grid that's up right now and some of the other ones, and those were seen as that conditional approval, that those were enough, I would be very concerned. So that's the substantive issue. The whole point here is to get something better than you could get through a traditional permit alone, which I think is something everybody probably in the room agrees with. I recognize the devil's in the details. My question, and we've talked about this a little bit, is these are shown as evidence or a reflection that we need tighter language. But I see the language in the permit as being pretty good, and yet implementation as the issue. And I know in our conversation has been that this can be appealed to us through another process. So I'm a little unclear on what more information we would put in other than we really mean it as guidance. And I take that seriously, because I think the challenge, and we've all talked about this a lot, is how do you set up the permit that incentivizes this multiple benefit work that we really, really want on a lot of levels. In some places it's water supply, in other places it's greening. It's multiple benefits, it's flood control. Multiple benefits can take all forms. There are plenty of cities using this who don't have a water supply issue, but this is the approach that they're taking, even bigger time than any of our California cities are taking if you go back east. So the question is where the appropriate lever is for that. I fear, I'll just put it out there, that if you make the permit the limit so strict, people will say, oh, forget it, we're just going to build a treatment plant to meet those numbers, and then we're not going to get the leverage. So there's that balance of trying to get more than you can just get through strict implementation of a permit language, but I'm concerned if it's so lax. But here, my understanding, and I'll finish, and you can help illuminate, my understanding is that it's not so much the language in the permit as the implementation that would come here, and that it's hard for us to take notice of a process that's in process in implementation of the permit. And I just want to understand that, and other people to understand that a little bit better before it feels okay to me, and that I'm sure there's nothing else we can do to send notice. Is that, I use more words.
No, I think it's actually very helpful. I think that one of the basic tenets of the draft order that's before the board is the notion that while this appears to be an acceptable framework going forward, the proof really will be in the pudding. It really will be important to see what kinds of watershed management programs are submitted, and enhanced watershed management programs are submitted and ultimately approved by the regional board, to make sure that there are real projects that go in the ground, so that we can actually see the benefits from this approach as compared to the previous approaches for municipal stormwater regulation. With respect to the timing, what the draft order says is that we're not planning on adding to the record this much more recent set of submittals of watershed management programs and conditional approvals. It's correct that the environmental petitioners asked the board to take notice of these things. We proposed to not take notice, since essentially much of what was discussed is not really before the board today if the board adopts the draft order as drafted. But that we will be looking to the regional board to, essentially really carefully implement the permit, including especially the approvals of those watershed management programs and enhanced watershed management programs. Since those conditional approvals were issued by the staff, the environmental petitioners, at least some of them, have done two things. They've filed a petition for review here with the State Water Board. They've also taken advantage of the provisions in the permit that allow any person to seek reconsideration by the full regional board of those staff approvals. So they've done that. They have both of those pending at this point in time. It may or may not be appropriate to ask the regional board whether they plan on scheduling that for reconsideration today. You could do that if you'd like. But our perspective for today and our recommendation for today is that to take into account this second step, the approvals of those watershed management programs today as part of this order would require the board to essentially open up the scope of this proceeding substantially and have to delay action to essentially take comments on that. We think it would be wiser to allow the process to work through the regional board, allow the regional board to decide what the final watershed management program should look like in the first instance, and then the state board would have an opportunity to review those approvals to determine whether they meet the state board's expectations.
To that point, if we go to page 58 of the markup, the red line strike out with the red and the blue, we're calling that the composite order, is that right?
Actually, parties don't have a copy of that, but I'll
okay.
give the page, and it's the one we put up, but what we distributed was the change sheet that had accepted the reds already.
It is page 57 and 58 of the change sheet version.
Right, there's a section entitled, it starts on page 57, direction to the Los Angeles Water Board to report to the State Water Board on implementation. So this is our staff's recommendation to create a process that comes to us, given that the statewide significance of this type of a framework and some very specific dates of reports to this board, as well as specifically we ask the Water Board, and there's a bullet list here about on-the-ground structural control measures, etc. Monitoring results, trends in that monitoring, available permit compliance data. It's a fairly comprehensive report that the Los Angeles Water Board has concurred is appropriate as part of this order, as far as creating transparency of this review process that was discussed by the commenters.
I should probably add, in the same area where we discuss what happens next, with the submittal of the watershed management programs, I think it's absolutely accurate to say that we welcome the environmental petitioners and other interested persons' involvement in terms of reviewing the submittals, critiquing the submittals, providing input initially to the Los Angeles Regional Board, and then ultimately if the State Board takes it up to the State Board, because as we're all saying, it really is the critical step is how the permit is implemented. And so I don't want to make it sound like we don't appreciate their input on this. In fact, we very much do. It's just that at this point, our perspective and our recommendation is that input be directed first to the Los Angeles Regional Board, let them make the decision, and then have it come back to the State Board for the State Board to review that decision if the State Board so desires.
Would it also be that this addition that you put into the decision that's more specific, as Stephen said, is sort of direction to the Water Board of what we expect to see in the permits? Here you're asking for a report, the first one in 2.5 years, but on all the permits, but that's why you put this in there.
Absolutely, that's why it's in there, and that would occur even if there were no petitions, no challenges to those approvals. We would want to see those reports because the State Board, as it expresses in the draft order, really has a strong interest in making sure that this framework that this approach works. So if the state board were to take up a petition before that, then, we'd get a lot of that information on an even faster track. But again, even if there are no petitions, the state board order does direct the regional board to report quite a bit of information so that we really can track how it's being implemented.
Well, and we'd have to promise to fast track that, right? Because our petition process can take quite a while. Sorry.
And I'm not sure if this is directed at the regional board or at the state board. I'll start with the state board and see if you can answer it. It seems to me that at the heart of some of the criticism, or maybe a lot of the criticism of these, particularly the WMPs, is having been burned by the iterative process. And so can you speak to why this approach is better, with WMPs particularly, why it is better than the iterative process that didn't apparently work well, whether it didn't work at all, I don't know, but didn't work well, and certainly is not trusted. So I'll start with Emil, and then if the regional board wants to say something.
I'll take the first crack at it and let the regional board answer also. But a few things. So the iterative process, the way it was structured was it was a permittee initiated. There's an issue. Here's what we propose to do. The regional board could approve it. The WMP, and it just doesn't have any detail. There are no specific requirements. It's quite vague. The watershed management program is an actual program that requires the permittees to actively engage in it, to take action, to do a reasonable assurance analysis, which up front tries, at least attempts to model with available data, what water quality problems might be addressed through what measures. Propose that, have it approved, and then actually, the requirements are to set deadlines. They're meet those deadlines. We've tried to make it stronger by making it very clear that in the end, once there's a deadline, compliance is determined through monitoring. So you're actually trying to reach compliance with a receiving water limitation. And that deadlines can only be extended with public review and comment and approval by the executive officer. So it's a pretty tight schedule, and there's no discretion there. The permittee enters it and carries out these activities compared to the iterative process that was just lacked detail and any kind of action forcing mechanism. So do you want to add something to it before we go to the regional board?
So I would just kind of summarize what Amel said, which is that what we had, in my opinion, in the iterative process, and is still in the permit, is this idea that you identify a problem and you figure out the best way to fix it and you fix it. But that was about it. What the step forward here is the idea that it's not a passive process. It is a thought out process, and that before you start, you think about what you're looking for and how to look for it and what you would do, and then you examine how successful that is. I would like to make one other comment that hasn't been mentioned that I think is important, is either the regional board, or if it came to under our own motion or under a petition, determines that a WMP is inadequate to meet receiving water limits at the and that there isn't adequate assurance in that process, then the permit contemplates that they go directly into compliance with receiving water, and under some other mechanism, I would expect something like an enforcement order or some requirement that they can come into compliance. It isn't, once they decide to do this, then they get to do it forever, however they want, without any oversight. And I agree that that there is flexibility built into the WMPs and EWMPs because that was envisioned to have flexibility. But there is also accountability and oversight. We have tried to increase that accountability and oversight with this order. And so there is a consequence for, just as a hypothetical, if some of the items that are of concern here are approved without actually showing the reasonable assurance that they seem to indicate from the regional boards, that would be the kind of thing that we would look at as for determining if there was really sufficient evidence that they were moving forward. This is not about developing a set of theoretical projects that might get there if we ever found the will to fund them. This is an alternate path to compliance for receiving water limits, and if you're unable to meet that alternate compliance path, then we can issue enforcement orders to get there.
Just one comment. I was just recently at SWRCB, and the Southern California Coastal Waters Program, Research Program in Orange County, and one of their staff is doing an analysis of stormwater BMPs and which ones, accomplish more than others. His report's not finished yet, so I can't really, give you totally the punchline, but it does illustrate how we are learning about these BMPs all the time. And interestingly, it looks like one of the BMPs that's really quite inexpensive, Mr. Terrier, is coming out with the gold medals. And so I'll wait till their report is out, but it's the sort of thing where flexibility is going to be extremely important, because some indications might be that you'd have to put in something terribly expensive when in fact you may not have to do that. And so you need that flexibility to be able to make those choices as new information becomes available.
Couple other questions, and I know we'll be asking more questions of other folks. This distinction between the WMP and the EWMP being treated the same, they're not treated exactly the same, are they?
They're not exactly the same. They're with the EWMP has additional requirements, and permittees that are willing to engage in that process have additional requirements, limitations that they're deemed in compliance with, in particular with the final TMDL, WQ bells, and other limitations.
That's the distinction.
That's the biggest distinction.
But the reason for going into an EWMP versus a WMP is because there's at least a hope that there will be a bigger project, more watershed-based project that everyone can contribute to, rather than going city by city by city, correct?
I think that's part of it. The other part is this this promotion of capture of the 85th percentile storm event, and that's the big difference. Is that the environmental commenters are correct that the EWMP says that if you're doing the 85th percentile planning and infiltrating, that capture and reuse, that you are in compliance with your water quality-based effluent limits during that process. And that was specifically developed to incentivize that process. What we added at the end was to say, but when you're done, you need to go out and monitor to show that that actually does get there. And that is an additional safeguard. We are acknowledging that that this provides a period of time where people are deemed in compliance while they're doing that, because we want them to do that.
And the WMPs don't get that?
The WMPs don't get that. They have to show a different reasonable assurance analysis to show that their projects in total would be meet water quality standards, and they have to verify those throughout the process.
And so that it's almost, you could say it's a watershed scale 85th percentile analysis as opposed to site by site. Because isn't it true that the WMP framework still would promote 85th percentile projects? It just wouldn't be on a watershed scale.
Right. The difference
Still
is
see
that
some LID.
is that with the EWIMP, you can do a sub-watershed and deem that whole sub-watershed in compliance based on capture and infiltration or reuse of that 85th percentile. The WMP doesn't, my understanding, does not dissuade people from doing 85th capture, but it is not a, you're not using that as your compliance in and of itself.
One other thing, and then we'll move on and come back to the list. On the reasonable assurance analysis versus the every 2-year, the adaptive I can't believe that. I've like lived adaptive management my whole life. Adaptive management reporting, and then the additional requirement of a more regular report to us on how to sort of trying to do belt suspenders and flying monkeys there. Will you remind me of the reason why doing the reasonable assurance analysis more often is seen as too laborious?
So I'll jump in.
Okay.
So,
yeah, whoever wants to.
So I'd like to remind you that the permit that was petitioned didn't have a revisitation specifically of the reasonable potential analysis. It had it every 2-year adaptive management. What we proposed is adding a revisitation of the reasonable assurance analysis in total based on a few cycles of the, and so I wouldn't characterize it as saying we're not looking at the results until 8 years. What we're, or whatever the, I'm sorry, I can't remember now the exact timing of the date, but what we proposed is that as you're going through this adaptive management where you're looking at the results and you're reporting them to the regional board and they're reporting them to the state board, that after 3 cycles or so of that process, you go back and you check all of your assumptions, you rerun your models, you look at what you've learned. I would, if I felt more comfortable that we knew how to do all this today, that may not be necessary. The initial one would be fine, but I'm concerned that we don't know that, and if we don't go back and check our assumptions at some point in the process, we'll get to the end of the process and realize that
Oh, we did it again.
yeah, that we got halfway there because our assumptions weren't good enough, and so that's the idea.
Eliminate that because my understanding of this is that we were actually adding in more analysis, but from this presentation, you'd think we were taking it away. So that's the.
I see it as adding. It wasn't in the original requirement.
We'll no doubt come back to it.
We did actually try to clarify that in the last revisions in response to that particular comment, that we were trying to add something, not.
Right. It may not have worked, but.
Sounds like it didn't.
That was a nice try, though, I would say. So we'll see. We'll look at that. All right. Thank you for indulging me at the moment, and thank you to everybody else. Let's move on with the speakers. We'll no doubt come back to all of these issues with the benefit of everybody's thoughts. County of Los Angeles and LA County Flood Control District, 5 minutes.
Yeah. I respectfully apologize for the interruption, but on the record, LA Waterkeeper again objects to the appearance of Tracy Agoscu on behalf of LA County and the Flood Control District. We did previously file a motion to disqualify, and we again bring that motion to you today based on conflict of interest and the State Board's mandate for a fair and just hearing on this issue. Thank you.
Want to add, Mr. Lawful, because I believe we did respond to that motion.
There was a response that went to the environmental group's motion that was filed last year. The motion was denied on procedural grounds. Essentially, while the board does have an obligation to provide a hearing or an administrative process consistent with the with Chapter 4.5 of the Administrative Procedures Act and constitutional due process, the issue that has been framed by the keepers has to do with essentially ethical obligations of Ms. Sagoscu, and essentially it was denied on procedural grounds. Simply put, while there may be circumstances where the board would have to engage in that kind of analysis, this particular issue truly is a private party dispute. It would involve getting into the scope of representation. Those are fundamentally issues that in our review of the case law should be resolved either by the state bar or by the courts and not by the board. It would be beyond our expertise.
Okay, am I ready? Okay. All right, good afternoon. Chair Marcus, Vice Chair Spivey Weber, members of the board. My name is Angela George, and I am an Assistant Deputy Director with the Los Angeles County Department of Public Works. I want to thank you for this opportunity for allowing me to speak today. I'm here on behalf of the County of Los Angeles and the Los Angeles County Flood Control District to express support for the 2012 LAMS4 permit and your revised draft order. As you may recall, the county and the Flood Control District supported your previous draft order in November of last year. Today, we want to commend your staff for all their tremendous work and a tremendous job in a very complex matter, as we've heard today. Although the 2012 LAMS4 permit is very ambitious and the cost to implement is very high, the county and the Flood Control District continue to support the adoption for several very important reasons. First, the revised draft order recognizes the need for comprehensive watershed response to stormwater that takes into consideration the vast size and interconnectedness of the LAMS4. Second, the revised draft order represents a holistic and collaborative approach to managing our scarce water resources. Third, as a result of the permit's watershed and enhanced watershed approaches, which we've discussed today, we've experienced unparalleled cooperation and action throughout the region. The cooperation is critical because the creativity and resourcefulness are vital to solving our growing statewide water supply pressures. And in this way, this permit is very timely. Finally, the revised draft order provides a visionary path forward to stormwater management in California. The revised draft order continues to hold permittees accountable for meeting very aggressive water quality standards over time, and at the same time acknowledges the vital function of providing flood protection to our communities. As you may know, the Los Angeles region has experienced destructive flooding events, including the flood of 1938, which caused over $40 million in damage, and that's in 1938 dollars, and the loss of life. Providing sustainable water supplies and healthy watersheds while reducing flood risk provides the maximum benefit to our communities. And now I'll turn over our presentation to Tracy Agoscu, our counsel for legal issues.
Good afternoon. My name is Tracy Agoscu. I am honored to appear before you today. Similar to the analysis recently undertaken by EPA in the District of Columbia MS4 permit, the revised draft order likewise finds that the 2012 LAMS4 permit does not violate anti-backsliding requirements because the approaches under the prior permit and the current permit are designed to achieve the same result, but through distinct paths that are not easily comparable. In fact, the revised draft order states that the 2012 LAMS4 permit is more stringent, including but not limited to the fact that the 2012 permit includes 33 TMDLs, whereas the 2001 permit only 3. Some commenters argue that there is no new information to support the exception to anti-backsliding provisions because stormwater pollution control measures and WMPs are well known and permittees have simply failed to implement them. This assertion ignores all of the information obtained by the regional board and permittees from the successes and struggles of implementing measures from the 2001 permit and the TMDLs that have been developed and implemented since that time. The legendary coach John Wooden said it best. It's what you learn after you know it all that counts. As mentioned by Angela, our MS4 serves many functions, including protection of life and property from floods. I'm going to have to cut my short. Although some commenters argue that the revised draft order's additional WMP and EWMP implementation reporting requirements are inadequate, these arguments miss the larger picture. The additional reporting allows permittees to evaluate their progress to better inform adaptive management, which is integral to maintaining compliance. Also, we offer support for the stormwater retention approach in the EWMP, as it is a widely used stormwater tool because it is technically feasible and a reasonable means of implementing the Clean Water Act. By the chair's leave, can we have approximately another 30 seconds? The revised draft order is a detailed and thoughtful support of the visionary and legally appropriate LAMS4 permit. Angela will conclude.
The 2012 LAMS4 permit sets stringent requirements that allow permittees the opportunity to effectively and efficiently address water quality and water supply. This will result in increased use of stormwater as a valuable resource in our communities and in our ecosystem. It is for these reasons and the reasons I stated before that the county and the Flood Control District support this forward-looking and precedent-setting permit. And the State Board's revised draft order. And I want to say thank you to all of you for allowing us to speak today.
Thank you. Any questions? That's short. Okay. Let's move to the next presentation. I have 15 minutes for cities of Agoura Hills, Artesia, Beverly Hills, Commerce, Covina, Culver City, Downey, Hidden Hills, Inglewood, La Mirada, Manhattan Beach, Monrovia, Norwalk, Rancho Palos Verdes, Redondo Beach, San Marino, South El Monte, Torrance, Vernon, Westlake Village, Arcadia, and Claremont. Norman DuPont and Andre Monette for 15 minutes.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd like to start with the paradigm shifting.
You'd introduce yourself since there are two of you.
Norman DuPont on behalf of the city of Agoura Hills and others. Andre Monet is here and he will step up for his portion of the presentation. It's a paradigm shift, no doubt about it. Will it ultimately work? As council indicated here, the proof will be ultimately in the pudding. But we believe it's worth a shot at shifting the paradigm. The County of Los Angeles, the biggest single stakeholder in the LA flood control and region, is supporting this permit. A number of cities believe, with some modifications we'll get to, but we believe this permit should be supported. We are working hard. As the county indicated, there are groups of meetings for WMPs and EWMPs. Cities are getting together to sit down, and as I will go through in a few moments, the financial consequences are not insignificant. But putting aside that, the effort is to budget and to try and make it. We'll need help from the state board and others. We're not going to underestimate that. But we believe it's worth a shot, in part because of the reason that everyone has been here, the drought. An EWMP program that retains 85%. We hope we'll get there. We're going to try our very best to get there. But an 85% retention of water in a groundwater basin makes a significant difference to water usage, water retention, and the need for OPM or OPW, other people's water, coming from other areas into Los Angeles. That's why we think that this process is very worthwhile. We'd like to go through a few comments, but I'd like to make one comment with respect to the Regional Water Board's suggestion by Ms. Purdy for clarifications on page 52. I don't speak for all of my cities, but at least for some of them, we would support that clarification, particularly the language to effectively prohibit that she recommended, and other of that clarification language. We think that merits serious consideration. If my technology can go forward for a second. Page 44, the LA Board recommended adding "or sooner" to a review of the revisions for the reasonable assurance analysis. We support that. We like the language "or sooner" if the need to do so is demonstrated by monitoring data. We don't think that's inconsistent with the way the regional board would exercise that, but we suggest that that language be put in there. Certainly the "or sooner" language as contained in the most recent draft makes sense for everyone in this room. Next, page 5, footnote 13. This goes to a critical question that Chair Marcus and others argued about the judicial notice for all of the WMPs submitted to date, all of the comments on the WMPs submitted to date, and other documents. We don't believe that today is the day to discuss whether the implementation is actually going to work. As State Council noted, there are petitions to review that process. Those petitions will work themselves out, but we respectfully believe that rather than getting into a debate today over whether a specific WMP meets specific requirements, we should be saying, and we urge you to say, does the permit as structurally designed, guarantee us the best possible shot at a paradigm shift? If it does, then we urge you to vote for the permit. And later on, if there's a problem with implementation, we know we'll be back in front of you at some future date to discuss those specific implementation problems, or probably in the first instance before the LA Regional Board.
A quick question, which is probably unfair given what you just argued. Do you have a dispute with how they've characterized this? If I were to look at, if you were to make the, if we were to argue it today, would I be hearing an argument that this is a mischaracterization, or that actually it is good enough?
I am going to have to do the rare event of I don't know for a lawyer. I have not looked through that. I've looked through their earlier comments, but I haven't really studied their comments on those particular WMPs. I will address one issue on one of the WMPs, which is the Lower San Gabriel River WMP, to talk about the amount of costs that we believe are involved in that process. But in terms of the specific language, I have not done that analysis. I wasn't coming here today to do that analysis. Page 40 of the change sheet, this is something that Council Emmel discussed with you. The technical feasibility, they struck the language, including the inability, despite all reasonable efforts, to obtain funding for a project. We would like that language to remain in because it's important, but at a minimum, we would appreciate that there be some clarification that the term substantial hardship could include a financial hardship. So that is our request as to that language.
That goes without saying. I mean, I do think that the issue that if you said reasonable efforts to obtain funding, you would never get the funding. Is it Dr. or Mr. Booth? I'm sorry. Professor Booth said, I mean, just from, I've been in local government too, and if there weren't requirements that were clear, we would never have gotten the funding for just about anything.
Oh, right. But the requirements are there. The question is, how many, can you at some point say, we just can't meet this specific goal because despite all efforts, all grants, we still couldn't fund the particular project? That's the question mark at issue. But if your observation, Chair, is that substantial hardship includes financial hardship, that goes without saying, we'll rest on that observation.
Well, it would end up being in the issue of hardship as opposed to your council didn't give it to you politically. That kind of
Right. No, the council has the right to try. The next observation we would like to make is that CASQA requested some clarification of language. In the change order, the proposed language was rejected. There was a discussion earlier today by State Board Counsel that that language wasn't really necessary. With due respect, we think that language is necessary. We support Casqua's suggestion that it be put in, and that's our observation as to that particular subsection with respect to commingled discharges. On the issues of anti-backsliding and degradation, let me move very quickly. We agree, the county and its flood control district agrees that the board has gotten it right, or the staff in the report have gotten it right on anti-backsliding and degradation. We wanted to add a few notes because the environmental petitioners in their most recent set of comments said, well, there's not enough factual support to make a finding that allowing some limited degradation for a high-quality water situation is necessary to accommodate important other economic and social events. I think you already heard from the councilman of Gardena on the impact to his city. Let me go through a couple of other comments that are already, we believe, in the record. There were the comments of Mary Ann Lutz of Monrovia at the December 2014 workshop. She specifically referenced a national mayor's council report talking about the impact on specifically on California cities from November 2012. That has additional details on those sorts of things. There were comments and answers at the December board meeting by consultant John L. Hunter on the cost of watershed management plans, because those were the ones most developed at the time. I believe there was a colloquy with board member Moore on that particular set of points. There are additional written comments by the city of Gardena regarding cost to some of the cities in the San Gabriel Valley area that are now in the record as part of comments in the record. And although the final WMPs are, as noted, not due until the end of this month, the tentative costs are out because city councils have to get city council approval to submit these documents. And the costs are high. LA County and 6 cities to split capital costs projected at $2.7 billion through 2021 for the Bologna Creek EWMP. And I want to modify and qualify costs. I'm a lawyer. I've got to qualify everything I say. These are not final costs. These are not engineered perfect costs. These are plus or minus 30%, plus or minus 50%, because they're conceptual at the design phase. But they are ranges, orders of magnitude of what cities are looking at to do this. In the Rio Hondo San Gabriel River watershed, the estimated cost is $1.4 million. Mr. Monet will speak more about that. In the lower LA River WMP, the capital cost ranged from $157 to $293 million. That's a number that actually the NRDC quoted in a recent brief that it is filed with the Ninth Circuit. So we will accept their range of numbers for this purpose to show that the WMPs are considerably expensive. Finally, new footnote 189 at page 70, and I'm referring to the current version, calls into question the constitutionality of 2 state water board provisions, sections 13225 and 13267. Then it goes on, after discussing the potential unconstitutionality of those provisions, to contain some other analysis of why those provisions may not apply. And it contains some other discussion of LA Regional Board consideration of costs. We have no problem with the latter discussion. If this state board wants to interpret its statutes, it is obviously free and has the expertise with its legal staff to do so. If it wants to put into the record additional comments about what the LA Regional Board did with cost and cost considerations, that is obviously this board's prerogative. We just don't think the first section about those two water code sections being preempted by federal law are appropriate for this board to say at this juncture. I'm now going to turn over to Mr. Monet.
Thank you, Mr. DuPont. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. Andre Monette on behalf of the cities of Claremont and Arcadia. Thanks. Mr. DuPont covered a lot of what I have to say as well. I just have a few
get closer
points
to the
make.
microphone.
I'm sorry. Excuse me. Just have a few brief points to make. I was initially going to start with the Defenders of Wildlife v. Browner case, but I'll spare you the boring details of a case that's 20 years old. What's most important, I think, here is a couple of things. I'll start with cost of compliance. The city of Arcadia is in the Rio Hondo San Gabriel River EWMP group. And as Mr. DuPont mentioned, the initial cost estimates for implementing that EWMP are now coming out. The cost for that is $1.4 billion over a 15-year period. And the cost to the city of Arcadia is $357 million. Again, over a 15-year period. And what that equates to is anywhere from $17 to $20 million a year. And for the city of Arcadia, that is not the entire general fund. It's about a third of the general fund, but obviously a third is a significant portion. For some cities, some members of that group, it exceeds the general fund. So the commitment here that these cities are making is no small amount. This is huge, and there's going to be real cost-benefit analyses that are going to go on internally with the cities, because at some point, if you're relying entirely on the general fund, it's going to be a question between laying off staff, closing parks, things like that, and implementing these programs. Now, thankfully, we don't have to rely entirely on the general fund. There's other funding sources out there. The water bond, for instance, includes funding for these kinds of projects. There's loans, there's bonds, there's potentially fees if you can get those passed. But none of that is absolutely clear right now. And for that reason, we think flexibility is paramount. Did somebody open the door? That sound is so funny. It's like the liquor store. You just walked in. I'm sorry. So, I lost track. Anyway, so I appreciated Ms. Wadhwani's clarifications earlier today about the language in the final order about financial stability or financial hardship. And now, Chair Marcus, we appreciate again your comments, but we would like some clarifying language in the final order that says substantial hardship, including financial hardship, because the way that things are poised right now, it could be read later on that in fact, the board did consider financial hardship as an issue and struck it and didn't put it back in. So we believe that having that level of flexibility is something that is within the intent of the state board and the regional board, and in fact is something that absolutely needs to be there just because of the way funding in this state is structured, and we ask that it be put back in. The other issue, and the slide doesn't really reflect it correctly, goes to the non-stormwater discharge issue. We briefed the board throughout this process on our objection to a prohibition on non-stormwater discharges from the MS4. Our reading of the Clean Water Act just it doesn't square with what's in the permit right now. The standard that applies to discharges from the MS4 is MEP. An attempt to put other standards on those discharges that are applying to cities exceeds the Clean Water Act, and for that reason we object to the requirements that are in the LA County permit. What I think is important for this process is that the illicit discharge prohibition and the illicit connection prohibition is already in the permit. It's in the Clean Water Act. It's also in the EWMP and WMP process, and we believe that should be including that in that process should be sufficient for compliance with that discharge prohibition. So we continue to object to that discharge prohibition in the first place to the extent that it attempts to apply a different standard other than the MEP standard to discharges from the MS4. But we also request that the state board allow for a deemed compliance as long as the illicit discharge connection and illicit discharge detection programs are included in the EWMP and WMP process, which they are under the order. We don't see a reason why you wouldn't do that, frankly, and so that's our request. And then just lastly, this is the city's intent. I mean, our cities fully intend to implement this permit. This is a good faith effort we're going to make, and we fully intend to identify and pursue all available funding sources for our programs. And we ensure to work with the regional board from now and ongoing future to ensure that water quality standards are attained. It's just a process that, especially under this permit, we need to be able to work with the regional board on developing the plans that get us there. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Could I ask a quick question? I appreciate your laying out these factors. Of course, when I see the costs, I think of a more holistic costs. So the fact that in Arcadia, for instance, in Claremont, you're in areas where you'll get groundwater recharge benefits. There's an incremental benefit as part of that equation as far as water supply benefit and that sort of thing. So along those lines, and as you pursue all available funding, how's the interactions with the local water purveyors been going, and have you been able to forge increased involvement with them, especially with the stormwater resource plan requirements that are linked to integrated regional water management funding in Prop 1?